the person watching this, hope this video finds you well. Welcome to Musical, Exploring Music with Kalyani. Today we are into the third and final episode of East Meets West. If you haven't watched the first two episodes, the link is in description and highly recommended. A quick recap. In the first episode, we spoke to Zaee about technical and conceptual aspects of Hindustani and Western classical music. And in the second episode, Reena told us about cultural and social aspects of it. In the third episode, we have someone with us who has had a training in both the kinds of music, Western and Hindustani, but mostly pursues Hindustani. Based in Melbourne, Australia, he has been taking sitar lessons from Pandit Sugato Nag since 2018. He also considers himself fortunate to have received extensive talim from Shri Purbayan Chatterjee and Surmani Pandit Prabhakar Dhakde. Before sitar, he learned a little bit of bansuri, which is Indian flute, saxophone, piano, guitar and tabla. He still continues to explore different instruments while maintaining sitar as his primary focus. In search of aesthetic sound, he puts to use his knowledge and training in both the schools of music, Western and Hindustani. Let's welcome on board Sahaj. Hi Sahaj.
Hi Kalyani.
Welcome to Musical and thank you so much for joining us today for the third episode of East Meets West.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And let's get to the discussion now. So could you tell the viewers a little bit about your musical journey in short, as in how did it all start? How did it all progress?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's a bit of a complicated journey, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. I started tabla when I was in class 3 in the 3rd grade, and then gradually went forward into my musical growth, but then moved towards pop music because I didn't understand anything about tal or the classical side of things, and started playing guitar. So then my sister and I did lots of pop music. And then only much later, so only after moving to Melbourne in 2016, I started learning Hindustani classical music. Towards the end of 2016, sitar came later actually. So I started with saxophone and bansuri. And then sitar I actually started in 2018, learning from Pandit Sugato Nag, all via Skype. So like we're doing now, except with no video. So just with audio, he would sing and I would try to copy.
Okay, so you started with Indian music, which was tabla, and then you switched to Western, and then you made a switch back to
That's
Indian.
right. Yeah.
That is really complicated.
Yeah, it goes back and forth a lot.
Yes, and let's explore more about it in the discussion which follows.
Yeah.
So as you've been a student of both these kinds of music, do you find any similarities in the way students are taught, as in the teaching methods of both the schools? And do you find any differences? And what has your experience been in learning these two kinds of music as a student?
Right. Well, I mean, in all honesty, I haven't had that much of an extensive training on the Western classical side. I did a lot more heavy training and practice with Indian classical, but I did briefly do some piano lessons and guitar lessons. And the heavy focus on that type of music was much more on reading and understanding what was going on a sheet. So you understand how to play if you're playing with a band, or how to play if you're playing with, many other musicians, basically. And what I understood from that was the difference between Hindustani classical and Western classical, the major difference, is Hindustani music has focused predominantly on melody. So one musician can take one melodic idea, whether it's a rag or whatever you want to call it. He can take one idea and play or sing that for hours. It can just do infinite things with just one scale or mode. Whereas on the Western classical side, they've really amplified the harmonics, they've amplified chords, so you can play with huge orchestras, 50, 60 people, and make it sound so grand and majestic. So both styles have just gone in two different ways, but they've really, really gone, to the limit or even pushed the limits on everything. And yeah, I appreciate the fact that on the Western side, it's very analytical, and that approach is very exact and precise when it comes to how to work together. And on the Hindustani side, it's very much technical improvement for the individual musician. Yeah, so I guess
If I
understanding,
understand, sorry,
understanding the difference has helped a lot.
okay. So if I understand it correctly, the approach with Indian or Hindustani classical music is more individualistic rather than a team approach. So in Western, I'm just asking for my curiosity. Are you taught in groups also, or you are taught individually and then you play in group, or how does it work?
Um, well, it depends, because you can learn as a group. Like we had a music class, so there were like 30 kids in our class, and the teacher would, show you the sheet music on the board or whatever she was showing you with, and then you would understand, okay, this is this note, this is this note, and everyone as a class would learn together at the same time. So that's how it would work. The same approach on Hindustani teaching. They have like beginner levels. You can have a group of students. You teach sargam, basic composition, things like that. So yeah, on that side, it's very similar. Yeah.
Uh, then you spoke about you playing in Indian classical music, Hindustani classical music on saxophone, right? So, um, and you also play a great deal of instruments. We just spoke about it in your introduction that you play a lot of instruments, or you at least know how to deal with those instruments. Okay,
Hmm.
so what do you think about the interaction these instruments do with each other's kind of music? So, you've played Hindustani classical music on saxophone and maybe vice versa. So, could you tell our viewers about that?
Yeah. Um, well, again, I haven't really played anything else on saxophone. I've mainly only played Indian classical on saxophone. So, I mean, just as an example, like I did a performance in Nagpur at some point a while ago, playing saxophone. And before I was about to play, I was playing with another saxophone player. And just as we were about to play, the person announcing what we were going to play was saying, and now we have some jazz musicians who are going to play Indian classical. But that's totally not true because we never played jazz. So it didn't make it didn't make any sense. It's just the association of the instrument saxophone with jazz automatically like, okay, that's what you're playing, but it wasn't the case. Anyway, obviously saxophone is predominantly used to play jazz and Western classical music. But I never even got the chance to try that. Or maybe because I was so heavily, into Hindustani music that all my attention, all my focus was on that. So yeah, I just actually just focused completely on Hindustani music. Yeah. When I was much, much younger, so I was maybe in the sixth or seventh standard, I started playing guitar. Right after learning tabla, I started picking up guitar. And on the guitar, we had limited resources. We didn't have so much internet activity time, so I couldn't spend the time looking for songs and how to learn songs. So most of the time, I would just make up my own songs. And I didn't have technical understanding of chords either. I would watch other people play and then try to copy the same hand movements. So yeah, like that, I just ended up making different sounds. And ultimately, the goal is to make aesthetic sound. That's the whole point of music. So I just figured, okay, make something that I find aesthetically pleasing. And so I would do that. And there was some block in my mind. I was always like, no, I'm not reaching what I want. There was something in my mind that I wanted, but I wasn't able to play it on the guitar. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what it was. And it was just this never-ending frustration, musical frustration, like this isn't coming out. And then like way, way down the line, um, 2018, so like 10 years later, maybe 15 years later, I got a chance to try a sitar, one of my friend's sitars. And straight away, I figured, okay, there's chikari strings, so you can do jhala, and you can do different patterns of jhala. So I started doing jhala, and I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted to do. This is the exact sound that I wanted. And then there were even meaned options and khatka options that I wanted to do, which were coming out on sitar, but they never came out on guitar. So it was just this like huge moment of like satisfaction for me to be able to achieve a sound that was in my head as a child, in my older age. Yeah.
That that sounds really amazing. So, Sahaj, moving on from the instrumental interaction, let's go to genre interaction, where you've been a student of both. You have learned both at different points of time. What was your experience in learning the other, and how did the training in first help you in learning the later on, in learning the other format later on? And did you ever try, or were you ever tempted to draw any parallel lines between the two and compare them and get confused maybe anytime with the common or confusable concepts in both these genres?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. Um, well, okay, because my first primary training was in Hindustani music, so tabla. I started with tabla. And when I was learning tabla at a young age, initially we would write things down, as you all do. But then later on, after we did a few kaidas and lelas and things, we weren't allowed to write things down. So I wouldn't write things down. Guruji would recite the bowls, or he would tell us the theme, kaida or whatever it is, and he would say, okay, improvise, play, and come up with things. If you play something wrong, or if you introduce a different theme, I'll stop you and then show you what you did wrong and how to correct it. So that approach really stuck with me later on. Then later, when I was doing piano, I remember having a class, and instead of reading the sheet music, or instead of doing, the analytical aspect of it while playing, I would just remember the melody and try to play, which is what I was doing when we were doing tabla. So my teacher used to get angry at me because I would be playing, and the sheet music would be there, and she could see that I wasn't reading the sheet music because you have to turn the page. When you reach the
Right.
end of the page, you turn the page. So I would play, and I didn't know when to turn the page, so I would just guess. And then she'd get really angry at me, like, "What are you doing? You have to read the sheet music. You can't just, listen to it." And she was saying, "Okay, it's good that you can understand, you can hear and play, but you should be able to read." So I was like, "Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah." And then I would keep playing, and then I remember at one point I was playing and I closed my eyes, like because I was getting really into it. So then she realized, okay, he's not reading, and then I got in trouble again. So, I guess that's just one story about how, the initial training on the Hindustani side really affected that, the Western side moving forward, is that it really increased the power of the listening ability on the Hindustani side. And then carrying that forward to the Western side, you really, I guess, depend more on your ears than your eyes to read. So yeah, and then it never really went the other way. Like when I was doing Hindustani now, none of like I can't read and then play. I have to just play what I hear. So I think that's the initial training that helped, which was in Hindustani.
So, did your training in Western kind of at any point of time come in your way while learning this? Or did
Um,
it, because having an additional knowledge of harmonics and everything, I lack it. I don't know what sort of a world I'm missing out on. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like classically speaking, it has helped, but just in very, very small ways, like how to tune a string, like because sitar has so many strings, and when you just strike the chikari strings, so many other strings resonate as well. Just same as many other instruments, santur, sarangi, sarod, all of them, they're like that. You strike one string, and many other strings will also vibrate because of the frequencies. So tuning particular strings to particular notes, depending on the rag, or how one string should be a bit more dudded than the other string, or if you're playing with another musician, what should they be tuned to? Or if you're playing with a tabla player, if you want to do something innovative or different. So if you're playing Yaman, for example, I mean, primarily all the tabla players usually tune to sa, of course. Sa is
hmm,
the bass. But then, if you're in the mood to kind of try something new, like I played a performance where we tuned the tabla to Shuddhaga in Yaman, because of Gazavadi. So yeah. So we had two tabla players. One was tuned to Shuddhaga and the other one was Sa. So you still
hmm.
have Sa, and then you have also Shuddhaga, which sounds interesting because usually they'll do Sa Pa or Sa Sa Kharaj. So it was just an experiment, and I guess that sort of understanding came from Western music about how you can, work with notes together to create like a chord or an interesting sound like that. Yeah.
Nice. Said you are someone who is staying far, far away from India, which is the birthplace of Indian classical music. So, one question which people like me have most often is how would you manage your musical accessories? Where do you get your sitar from? Where do you get the other accessories like your misrab and everything? Um, Assuming one day a string breaks, what do you do? Where do you get your sitar makers, or how do you manage things so far away from India?
Yeah.
And another aspect of it is, since you are that far away, the environment around you where audience is a little bit knowledgeable or at least receptive. They understand something about Hindustani classical music. They at least understand Saregama.
Hmm.
Okay. Or getting or being able to listen and perform in multiple concerts, because in India concerts happen throughout the year.
Yeah.
So you can go watch, listen to different concerts, and as an aspiring musician, you may also get an opportunity to perform much more than what it probably is that far away from India. So how do
Yeah.
you manage these things, materialistic things, and also the environment? How do you deal with that?
Right. Okay. It's a really good question, and I feel like I might get lost in whatever answer. So if I do, just bring me back. um,
Sure.
so yeah, when it comes to the material aspect of it, that is definitely a huge barrier to entry. So that's, I guess, one of the reasons, like, we were talking before, prior to the interview, we were talking about how creating culture and creating a bigger audience in the West or abroad outside of India. The reason I think like it's kind of growing slowly, but a bit too slowly, is the barrier to entry. Like for instruments, for example, there are no sitar makers in Australia. Well, not that I know of. Or there's no sarod makers that I know of, or tabla. Like it's quite limiting. So because of the barrier to entry, you have to order a sitar from India, or a sarod from India, or tabla, and you have to wait for a very long time. And there's always this thing in your mind, even if you have the thought, oh, I should start learning sitar. Part of you might think, oh, but it'll be so expensive to order a sitar, or it'll take so long to come. What if I lose the interest before it arrives? Or, many things like that come. Um, so yeah, I mean, I get my sitar. I bought mine from a sitar maker in Miraj. So I just figured that would be the most reliable, because I was considering just buying one from a shop because it was quite easy, and they organized delivery and all that. But then I was really, really hesitant, because if you're going to buy an instrument, especially if, somewhere so far away, you might as well spend the money and get a reliable instrument. Because if the instrument sounds good, then automatically you'll be inspired to do more riyaz, try more, and that results in more sadhana, and then your development will be faster. There's no point in spending like 1,000 rupees, getting a really cheap sitar that doesn't work, and then not doing any riyaz, because of course you're not going to do riyaz. So yeah, I just kind of went for it, ordered a sitar, and then it arrived, and it sounded really good. So yeah, I didn't have any issues on the material side. And whenever I need, new materials, strings, bridges, whatever, I'd order from him again, always. Um, One thing about learning, or starting Hindustani music abroad, is that there's everyone's always talking about you have to learn with Guru Shishya Parampara. That's how you have to learn, and even that's how I've been like conditioned to learn. Even myself, I was always really hesitant about learning over Skype. Just because of basic things like, how will I know if I can hear him properly? What if there's some distortion happening? Or, what if I get the wrong technique by playing? So I was always extremely scared. And I feel like that fear has really helped, because when I first started playing sitar, um, we would have, me and my Guruji Pandit Sugato, we would have Skype lessons, but my internet connection wasn't great. I was in an apartment in the middle of Melbourne. So because of that, we couldn't have video. We would only have audio. So
Okay.
audio, this was very terrifying for me because even then the audio was quite, dodgy. It wasn't that good. So I was always extremely terrified about posture, because I was aware that posture for an instrument technique is the most important thing. And the main thing about playing an instrument is creating efficiency. Spend the least amount of energy that you can to play a phrase or to, apply your hands in a particular way so that you can achieve maximum speed, maximum clarity, with minimum energy, like expending the minimum amount of energy. So I had to learn how to, the technique of sitar and everything by following Pandit Buddhaditya Mukherjee. He's like my idol. I follow everything that he does. So what I used to do like when I was first learning, I used to have a mirror. I used to sit in front of a mirror and play, and I would have my laptop open just on a frozen picture of him playing, how he used to hold the sitar, how he holds the sitar. And then I would try to copy that exactly. So copy how he was holding it, look in the mirror and try to copy that exactly. And then that's how I started learning. And then I would do sargam like that, dance, all that, and then try to focus on learning like that.
I'm just going to interrupt you here for a bit. Are you left-handed sitar player?
Oh, no, I'm right-handed.
Okay, because you spoke on mirror, and
Yeah.
so I was just wondering if you're a left-handed sitar player.
No. I mean, I would just try to copy as best I could, like that. But I'm right-handed sitar player. Yeah. But
Okay.
anyway, I would just like to go to talking about how everyone should learn. I know a lot of people have, especially gurus, have said, no, I'm not going to teach online. And that's completely understandable because it must be very frustrating as a guru to try to teach online and the student just isn't learning, or they're not able to, do the even most simple things they're not able to do or learn compositions. And that's completely understandable because the society isn't there, the circle of, you're not even getting the direct energy from the guru himself. Because I feel like when you're in person, the transfer of energy is very much like, it's very obvious when you're in person. But through Skype, it's a little less, I feel. Or not that it's less, but the intensity of the interaction is a little less. And of course, if you don't have video, then even less so. So definitely when it comes to online lessons, it's way more dependent on the student to have discipline to do riyaz, to properly analyze other recordings of great masters that he or she appreciates. So obviously I started with Rag Yaman, and there was one recording of Pandit Buddhaditya Mukherjee playing Rag Yaman on Sur Bahar that I used to listen to every single night before going to sleep for maybe 7 months, 8 months, just
What?
obsessively. Yeah, I used to listen to that all the time. So now, like, I'm starting to notice that now, like some phrases that Panditji played in that recording are coming automatically in my phrasing now. And I've also noticed that in other rags, like Jinjoti, Darwari as well. Automatically, the phrases are coming from Panditji. So he has been a huge inspiration, a very big guru for me, even though he hasn't directly taught anything. I've tried to absorb as much information from him as possible. So basically, I'd just like to say that if there is a will, there is a way. Like you should definitely, start taking lessons if you can, and just work at it. Like do riyaz in your own room, even if you don't have people around you who are classically inclined. Just trust that what you like, you can try to aim for what you like and try to get that. That's not to say that I've achieved anything. I'm still trying. I'm still a baby, but we all have to push. And coming back to your thing about breaking strings, yeah. On that side of things, this is really cheesy to say, but YouTube has been a savior. It's been my other guru. You just YouTube how to change a sitar string, and there was tons of videos there, so many videos. So yeah, I just followed that, and then now I just change all my sitar like strings myself. Easy.
And we here think that mirrors is so far.
Yeah, yeah. So coming to the second part of your question, about audiences and the environment. So definitely, I would have to say, yeah, the audience outside of India is a lot smaller, significantly smaller, and that just comes down to population. Like the population of India is so huge that even whatever niche type of music or art form there is, the population is bound to be large just because the percentage will be higher. So even in Australia, like each different state, Victoria, Sydney, Melbourne, Victoria, New South Wales, and Western Australia, all of these places, they have small communities of Hindustani music as well. So Melbourne is considered like the cultural hub of Australia. So there's a lot of pride that goes into the fact that there's a lot of culture here. So I actually feel like we get a lot of support from different community centers and all sorts of things for Hindustani events. So now we've got a nice society here with about maybe 100 people, 150 people, all practicing musicians. Oh, they very much enjoy it. So I personally really enjoy performing or playing with those people around because you really, you can try anything. And even if you try and fail, they understand the attempt. Okay, they understand you were trying to do something difficult. Maybe it's a complicated dihai or, something fast or whatever it may be. They understand and they appreciate it. So I feel like that has really helped in the growth, first off, of individual musicians and also the growth of a community. Because I see other people performing and then I'm interested. Oh, I want to be able to perform. I want to be at a level to perform. And other people see the same thing, so then they want to be at a level to perform. So we've seen many young kids who are trying to come up and play and, get better and better and better. And they're all talking about, yeah, I've been doing 2-3 hours, riyaz a day among my studies and all this, because they really want to be part of the community.
We are going to come back to this question of community building later on. But I just want to leave this small remark. When you have a community, managing all these things would also, the other material things would also be a lot easier. If you need guitar strings, there is somebody else also who needs something else. So when you pool your resources, it would be a lot easier as well to be able to obtain these things from so far away. Now, moving on to the community building part, we all know that institutionalization of music industry is not that much present in India, right? So, what is the scene abroad when you have very little, very, very small number of musicians who are coming together and trying to do something different, something unique? How much of binding do you see amongst these people and musicians of other genre from abroad? Musicians community, as in Hindustani musicians community that you spoke about, and when you interact with other genres, you interact with people performing other genres, how does that community build?
Right. Okay, well, this is a great question, and it's also a very big thing that's on my mind, in terms of building a community. Not for the sake of audience, but just for the sake of, just giving everyone this incredible knowledge about Indian classical music, which is such a grand art form, such an beautiful art form, and I'm just so surprised that less people know about it. It should be like incredibly popular. Not that it isn't popular, but like it should have a much larger audience, especially abroad. But I'd really like to say that like the UK, there's an audience in the UK or a group of people in the UK that have just done a phenomenal job. Like the scene in the UK with musicians like Rupa Panesar, Akash Parekar, Jasdeep Singh, Ustad Dharambir Singh Ji. He obviously was the teacher for all of them. And they're all sitar players and they have a beautiful sound. Their tone, sitar tone, is just gorgeous. I listen to them and it gives me so much hope. Like I really like to listen to those musicians. And that's not even just sitar. Like if you listen to all even tabla players, sarod players, Tarshenai even, Kirpal Singh Panesar, he is brilliant. So the tone that's created over there and just that whole style of music is different. It's very subtly different. Obviously still rooted with Hindustani music being the basis, but the tone has shifted. So I find that really interesting and very, hopeful. I find it very hopeful that, communities can be created all over the world. Obviously, there's large communities in the US, but the UK seems to be the most prominent, or at least on my social media or whatever I'm looking at, the UK is like very, very much prominent. So looking at their model as an example, we've been trying to institute the same thing in Melbourne. So we've tried to do retreats, organize retreats for classical musicians, to do riyaz, have monthly betuks so that everyone, students to advanced people, can perform and create a larger community. And then more and more people would like to join. And I feel like the more, as more people come, more people will come, like especially parents who want their kids to learn about Hindustani music. Because I mean, I have many friends myself, like my mother is from Maharashtra, so we're part of the Maharashtrian community here in Melbourne. And many of the parents, they want their children to learn Hindustani music, but it's not applied. Like they feel like it doesn't help their kids here. But that's because they're not aware of the scene. So they're making them learn piano, clarinet, saxophone so that they can score good marks in school or maybe make friends at school. But now that if we can create a very strong Hindustani society, then we'll be able to create this whole culture and maybe even a different style of playing the music. And that'll really, increase the audience. Not that I feel like that matters so much, but it'll just create a whole culture. And I feel like it'll increase the popularity or even understanding of Hindustani music, which is very critical.
That's right. And moving on from the same thread, when you interact with musicians from different genres, uh, what then starts to happen is that these musicians from different genres want to come together, even off stage and even on stage.
Yeah.
So they are supporting each other off stage, and then that sometimes translates to crossovers.
Hmm.
Musicians from different genres are coming together and they're performing not exactly any of the style, but they're performing something different, something which is unique,
Yeah.
and at times very, very beautiful.
Absolutely.
So the question that I have for you, Sahaj, is when we are talking about these different genres interacting with each other, what do you think about crossovers? Have you ever done any crossovers? And do you think it creates a space between these two genres of music where artists of both kinds can come together and perform? And alternatively, do you also feel that crossovers sometimes dilute the purity of both the art forms which are incorporated in the crossover? Over to you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is also another great question. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And well, basically, the way that I like to think about it is that music, the whole point of music or any art form, the basis is it should be aesthetically pleasing. No matter what it is, the goal is for it to be aesthetically pleasing. So Hindustani music on its own is incredibly aesthetically pleasing. The same with Western classical music. It's all about being pleasing, primarily. But they're also pleasing in their own way. Like, the way that the Western system of music has, developed and evolved is, in its own way to make it sound beautiful, which is exactly the same on the Hindustani side. Pakhavaj became tabla, sitar added sympathetic strings, also capacity to mean, so that it could copy the vocal. So each one has developed in its own way. So I feel like when you try to bring them together, if you put pure Western music and pure Indian music together, it sounds messy. It doesn't sound right. I mean, in my opinion, like it might sound very blatant or, rough to say that it doesn't sound right. But I would say a majority of the time it wouldn't sound as pleasing as the individual arts by themselves. That's not to say that 100% of the time it would be like that. There could be potentially, a group of musicians who are able to make it work. So, I mean, it's a possibility. But I think each one has to sort of cater to the other in order to make it sound nice. And so I haven't seen many of those, or maybe it's because, you know, the collision of our worlds, or the collision of the types of music, have, it's only just started. It's quite new. So maybe a couple of 100 years down the line, there'll be a new form of music, or which interacts both, or maybe someone down the line will figure out how to make them interact. But as of right now, I can't say definitively that it works or it doesn't work. I would say, based on the information, it doesn't seem like you could make it work so cleanly. Because if you've got someone who's been playing Hindustani music for 20 years, 20, 30 years, and someone who's been playing Western music for 20, 30 years, that's pretty much like all that they know. Not to say that they don't know something else, but they know the knowledge of what they're doing in so much depth that they apply the same principles, the same tips and tricks that give that beauty to what they're doing to a fusion piece. But they sometimes clash, or a majority of the time I would say that they clash. And that's why it doesn't sound as good as the individual art forms by themselves. So yeah, I mean, that's what I would like to say, is that ultimately it's about being aesthetically pleasing. So, for example, there are many sitar players who like to do fusion, so they like to do something. But there's the habit of doing something flashy or complicated, like really long runs. But sometimes that is not what the song requires. Sometimes it just needs one note, or it just needs, like a few notes here and there. And sometimes it could need, a fast run, but it really, really depends on the song itself. But as a sitar player, it's quite difficult to just play one simple note. You want to play a big run, you want to play something fast or complicated, it's just in you to do that. So I guess, that's probably what I would say about fusion. And I've tried, I've dabbled in it, but then also the tonal frequencies are quite different. Like sitar, for example, I feel is very, very unique to Hindustani music. So if you look at something, for example, like Bansuri, Bansuri is a very universal sound. Almost every single culture in the world has some kind of woodwind instrument that is similar to Bansuri. Whether it's flute, the Chinese flute, Bansuri, it's all the very, very similar tone. So you can play Bansuri in any fusion song, and it sounds good. Totally, it sounds good. But sitar is very, very unique to Hindustani music. So because of that, and because of the frequencies that the sitar works with, and how the sympathetic strings resonate, because of that, it's very, very prominent in whatever song that it's in. So, personally, I found it very difficult to include sitar if I'm doing a song, a pop song with a friend of mine, or, whatever it may be. I find it quite difficult. Yeah. Whereas sarod is, I guess, a different story, because sarod also has similar tonal characteristics to something like cello or violin. It has similar characteristics. So the tone itself is pleasing or familiar to Western ears, or the ears of different cultures. So because of that, it applies, I would say. So the instrument specifications also play a really big role in the music fusion. So if you're trying to fuse Western music, whether it's pop or classical, with Indian classical.
All right, that was a great, insightful session with you, Sahaj. Thank you so much once again for joining us today and sharing your insight. And I hope this is going to help the viewers of musical in India, abroad, anywhere, understanding what is happening there, and for musicians who are watching it from outside India. I hope this helps in understanding how to go about music. And if you are skeptical about what will happen, how will I manage the instruments, the logistics, I hope this resolves all your questions. And so thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much for having me, Kalyani. I really enjoyed it. And the questions were so nicely structured.
Thanks. My pleasure, absolutely.